Hello again, this is Professor Watts, and we're now ready to start into Unit 4, which is about business cycle theory. And I'll start off with a brief lesson that just gives us a kind of an overview of what business cycles are all about, and we'll preview the different theories and explanations that we'll be looking into in this unit. First off, some general notes, and kind of a good note to start out with. Business cycles are in a way a good problem to have. I say they're a first world problem as opposed to a third world problem. What does this mean? Well, cyclical fluctuations in economic output. To have that, you had to first have some economic growth. Okay. There's no room to have a decline in your economic output unless you had some economic growth to begin with. Right? And you can really see this when you look at poor, undeveloped third world economies, which we've talked a lot about in our growth unit. Take a look, for example, at the GDP per capita, real GDP per capita of a country like Haiti. Okay, this goes back about 20 years. And you'll notice there's not much change here. They've kind of actually had a gradual drift downward, but they don't have what we would call a cyclical pattern where they have ups and downs. Well, why not? Because they haven't really had growth. There's no height of GDP growth for them to fall off of, so to speak. Okay. Take a look, on the other hand, at this chart with comparing the U.S. real GDP growth with sub-Saharan Africa, one of the poorest places in the world. And what you see is there's a general growth trend. You can see that GDP in the US is generally on this kind of growth trend right here. And there's some ups and downs. There's some periods where GDP tapers off a little bit. That's recession. Okay. You can see periodic recessions, but there's also periods of really strong growth in the US economy. We have a cyclical pattern. Okay, this is basically what we're talking about. Here's our big boom in the mid-2000s, and then here's our big recession, 2008, 2009. We'll talk about that quite a bit later on. You see we have cyclical ups and downs over a general growth trend. Okay. Sub-Saharan Africa, they have no cycles, they have no trend because they have no growth. Look how flat that GDP per capita line is going. This goes all the way back to 1960 here. Okay. That's just a tragedy of no economic growth. So cyclical, ups and downs, business cycles, in a way it's a good thing to have because, again, it means you've had economic growth. So it's not that bad of a problem in a very grand scheme of things. Now, of course, it is problematic for reasons we'll discuss here, primarily the unemployment aspect. Okay. But as I mentioned, what we're looking at is cyclical ups and downs. We've got a boom phase where GDP growth is above the long-term trend. And we've got a bust phase, commonly called recession, where GDP growth is below the long-term trend. And if that lasts a long time, we'll refer to it as a depression. Okay. Here's the basic definition. Actually, the National Bureau of Economic Research defines recession in this manner. Recession is a significant decline in economic activity spread across the economy, lasting more than a few months, normally visible in real GDP, real income, employment, industrial production, and wholesale retail sales. Well, let me simplify this for you. Recession means GDP's going down and unemployment's going up. Okay. Now, of course, the opposite would be true for a boom, but we don't really have a formal definition for a boom. What does it mean? Does it mean GDP's growing by a certain percent? Does it mean GDP's growing above the trend rate? Does it mean the unemployment is at the natural rate? We don't really have definitions. The boom is a lot harder to put our finger on than the bust. And I'm going to point out to you this is an important thing to think about right now. Politicians and politics and economic policymakers are going to focus on the recession, and specifically within the recession they're going to focus on the unemployment component for obvious reasons. This is what hits home, so to speak. This is kind of where we see the recession. This is where the economic pain happens. Okay. Note though, you can have a downturn in GDP without an increase in unemployment. Uncommon for the US economy, but as we get into business cycle theory here, we'll see that historically, it's been pretty common to have a sharp drop-off in GDP and actually an increase in employment. Okay? So they don't always go together. For the modern developed economy, by and large, recession means GDP's going down and unemployment's going up. And again, the focus, the political focus, the media focus is going to be on the unemployment problems. Okay, let's just take a look at some really basic data here, some charts. Here I've got a chart of U.S. real GDP growth rate Now we're looking at the annual growth rate, so it's, notice, in percentage terms over here. And this goes all the way back to the late 1940s. Okay, so this is the post-World War II track record of the overall U.S. economic growth. And notice fluctuations. Look, we've got some big booms. We've got growth above 10% here in some of these booms. Then we've got big busts. We've got recessions, minus 2% here, and a periodic. Okay, so we have growth, recession, growth, recession, growth, recession, on and on we go. The long run average growth rate, 3.2%. That's the red line that I've inserted into the graph here. Okay, so that's our trend, and you'll notice that we go above and below trend. Here's our big recession of 2008, 2009, where GDP growth bottoms out at almost minus 5%. That would be for 1 quarter. The overall yearly rate was about minus 3%, still bad enough. Okay. Here's our anemic economic recovery. We're averaging around 2% annual growth in the past couple of years, quite a bit below our 3.2% long-term average. That's why this recovery is generally viewed as a lackluster recovery. But there you can see the business cycle, okay, the ups and downs in GDP growth, and that's really what we're referring to. Take a look at this chart, which shows the same thing. Okay, the blue line is that same GDP line, that GDP growth rate trend, and that's on the percent change over here on the left side. And the red line now is the unemployment rate, the overall U3 unemployment rate. That's over here on the right-hand side. We also have in this chart the recession bars. Every recessionary period is marked here on the time axis. And notice what happens. Let's take the 1980-82, the double dip, big recession. Okay, notice what happens. GDP growth had peaked out before this. That's something like 6%. That's really strong GDP growth. It then comes down here, minus 2% maybe in 1980, and then really gets low, minus 2.5% in the 82. While GDP growth is going down, the unemployment rate, of course, is going up, and you'll see that trend in basically every recession. Unemployment's going up as GDP growth goes down. Unemployment's going up here in the 2001 recession as GDP goes down. Here's a biggie. Here's the 2008-2009 recession. GDP growth is crashing. Unemployment is spiking above 10%. So this is the basic phenomenon that we're trying to explain with business cycle theory. Why does this happen? Is it possible to engage in economic policy to alleviate or even to avoid it? Because, again, of the problems associated with unemployment and the economy being below its long-run potential. Okay, so with that in mind, we're going to look into, in some detail, 3 major business cycle theories. There are many business cycle theories out there. I'm going to just tell you these are going to be the most relevant ones for us. These are going to be the ones provided by the mainstream of economics, and they're going to be relevant, we'll find, for both historical and recent business cycle experiences around the world and in the U.S. in particular. So let me give you a quick preview now, and then the remainder of this unit will be a more detailed exploration of each of these theories. We start off with real business cycle theory. Real business cycle theory, simple to understand, as the name implies, it's going to focus on real factors, factors of production, and it's going to say that changes in real factors cause changes in real output. It's very straightforward. Okay. Real factors, what are we talking about? We're talking about land, labor, capital, and technology, factors of production. Okay. Notice this kind of sounds familiar to us from growth theory. This references a Solow model. Okay, so we'll build on that a little bit when we explore this theory. And you'll also notice that it's associated with classical economics, or the modern descendants of classical economics. This was neoclassical economics. And I have over here our representative. I'm going to show you a representative kind of thinker for each one of these theories. And actually I'll give you some quotes and some explanations from this particular economist, Jean-Baptiste Say, French economist in the 1800s. Okay, next we have the Keynesian business cycle theory. It's really part of the broader Keynesian school of economics, named after John Maynard Keynes, a brilliant English economist who was active in basically the first half of the 20th century. And Keynes really reacting to classical thinking, which he says can't really explain the Great Depression of the 1930s. And Keynes really came to prominence with his kind of revolutionary new way of thinking about business cycles in the 1930s in the depths of one of the biggest depressions the world has ever seen. We'll talk a lot more about the Great Depression as well. Okay, so here's John Maynard Keynes, and he's not actually going to reinvent economics. The ideas he's going to articulate have actually been around in one form or another for a long time, but he's going to kind of dust them off and rehash them and provide some new emphasis for them. As opposed to real business cycle theory, what we'll do a lot of here is compare and contrast these different business cycle theories and think about them in the context of one another. Keynesian thinking is going to focus on nominal factors as opposed to real factors, and the main nominal factor we're interested in here is the amount of total nominal spending in the economy. In other words, what is the dollar amount of total spending in the economy? And for reasons that we will explore, there are good reasons to think this variable matters, and we'll explore that and we'll build that up when we get to the lesson on the Keynesian theory. This could be very, very relevant for explaining things like the Great Depression and like the recession of 2009, which we just went through. You should know, if nothing else, that Keynesian thinking is very influential in economics and on government economic policy, and again we'll explore in a little more detail the reasons as to why that is. Finally, I want us to take a look at the Austrian business cycle theory. It's part of the Austrian School of Economics. This one has gotten quite a bit of recognition as well in the recession of 2009. A lot of people think that the recession of 2009 and the build up to it was an Austrian style business cycle. This was probably most famously associated with this economist Friedrich Hayek, who was actually born in Austria as part of the Austrian School of Economics, but he spent most of his time in Britain and then in the US, and he was active basically all through the 20th century. And Hayek also was trying to explain the Great Depression, but he took quite a different approach from Keynes. And he's not going to focus on real factors, he's not going to focus on nominal factors, he's going to focus on something else entirely, which is a misallocation of capital. And he's actually going to put a lot of emphasis on the boom phase, not just the recession phase. He's going to say what went wrong with price signals, with interest rates and such, that caused a massive misallocation in the capital areas of the economy and the investment sectors that necessitates the recession, which is actually a corrective device of the economy trying to get back on a sustainable growth path. And as I mentioned, Austrian thinking has been really prevalent, has really gained a lot of attention since the housing boom and the recession of the late 2000s. Okay, so that's it for our little preview here. We will move in the next lesson. We'll launch right into real business cycle theory, and I will introduce you to the thinking of classical economics, Jean-Baptiste Say, in a little more detail. We'll spell out a framework for understanding the theory, and then we'll look at some real-world examples.
Straight from Jersey, doing just what I feel. Steal a meal, I'm the druggie to deal, but keep it real.